The 2018 budget statement and economic policy was presented to Parliament last week, Wednesday. The budget is supposed to put Ghana back to work by translating the macroeconomic stability achieved in 2017 into shared growth via aggressive policies aimed at creating more opportunities for jobs. Is the budget going to bring the necessary development we all hope for, or this is just business as usual, a document full of many policies and targets that might not see the light of day? To discuss these issues and more, I have with me Dr. Said Boakye, Senior Research Fellow at Institute for Fiscal Studies, and Honorable Ntim Fordjour, Member of Parliament for Assin Constituency, and you are watching The Hard Truth. I am Nana Akusia Kunidu Asante Samuels. You're watching The Hard Truth, and we are so privileged to have Dr. Said Boakye, a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and Honorable Ntim Fordjour, Member of Parliament for Assin Constituency, will be joining us soon. But welcome to The Hard Truth,
Thank you very much for
How are you?
I'm great.
Your beard. Are you trying to be like Moses?
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
So how many years have you had this beard for?
Since it started growing, maybe when I was around 15 years,
Good. So, Doc, the 2018 budget was presented to Parliament last week, Wednesday, and there's been diverse views on both sides, positive and negatives, on what it really means to the Ghanaian populace. Ejuma budget, they call it, and 419 and Wahala budget, the minority also calls it. What do you think of it? What do you make of the budget?
Of course, being a human endeavor, it will not be perfect. That doesn't mean there are no positive sides to the budget. So we have strong positives and have negatives as well.
So tell us about, in your view, what are the strong positives and the negatives?
This can be contrasted with what happened last year, 2017. When we brought the budget, the first thing some of us argued was that the revenue projection was overly ambitious. Budget, what defines the budget is largely revenue, because it is from revenue that you do your spending. And if the revenue you are going to get is not going to come, how do you spend? They plan to increase revenue by 33.5%. Based on historical records, based on historical trend, we said it was not going to be obtainable. And for that matter, the expenditure plan will be thrown overboard. But it looks like this time around, they've learned the lesson. Their revenue target is not that ambitious. It is obtainable. And for that matter, if they work hard, they'll be able to obtain it.
So is it like, are we going to see positive impact on the Ghanaian people? I mean, from where you sit, do you think that this budget it's gone towards the positive side of the populace?
If it is implemented accurately and the macroeconomic targets are hard, then definitely we'll be able to see it in relation to the macroeconomic numbers.
Right.
But as to what the people call the pocket issues, that one is very difficult to predict, because this budget in particular is a consolidation budget. It's not a growth budget, even though the government would like to present it so. It's a budget that is aimed at fiscal consolidation, which is also aimed at macroeconomic stability. And when you do that, when you prepare a budget of that kind, you are not aimed so much at growth.
But Said, debt to GDP ratio reduced from 73% in December 2016 to 68.3% as of September this year. Fiscal deficit of 4.6% of GDP has been projected for 2017 against a target of 4.8% of GDP. Inflation reduced from 17.2% in September 2016 to 11.6% as of October 2017. What do you make of this?
Yes, that was the 2017 budget performance, and it is great because there was instability, and the instability is being tamed. Stability is being achieved, but it is not where the country wants these numbers to be. They are not at the right place. For instance, inflation is around 11.6%. You want to be in the single digit. Interest rate is still very high, and the country wants it to come down. Of course, the CD stability is a little bit okay, but then it needs to be strengthened further. So this budget is trying to achieve that, to strengthen the stability.
But we can see that clearly the government has, achieved some level of macroeconomic stability. So do we see the stability continuing next year, 2018, from where you sit?
Largely so, largely so. Where the danger is usually is the exchange rate. But it looks like the country has very appreciable size of exchange rate to support the city, foreign currency to support the city. You cannot predict with absolute certainty what will happen into the future. But based on what you are currently seeing, we largely hope and believe that the stability will continue, barring any unforeseen circumstances.
Macroeconomic targets for 2018, are they achievable from where you sit again? Do you think they're achievable?
That is what I'm saying. When it comes to the macroeconomy, of course, there are certain micro stuff issues, like certain transfers, industrialization, and those kind of stuff are different. But when it comes to the macro or aggregate numbers, inflation target is obtainable. The deficit target is obtainable. The stability target, exchange rate stability target, they are all obtainable, given their performance in 2017. But like I said before, that doesn't mean that the budget doesn't have issues. It also has certain issues.
I see, but in August this year, you questioned government's revenue planning process at arriving, at its revenue targets. What do you think the government is getting wrong when it comes to projecting its revenues?
We see it over-assess its strength. Last time I used the analogy of the boxer. Before he gets to the ring, he thinks that he can, in no time, beat the opponent. So the government thought they are so powerful, they are so strong, and they can beat the trend. So they projected way beyond what historical trend could give the country. And they have learned a good lesson. Like this year, for instance, next year, for instance, they are projecting to increase revenue by 23.7%, which is within, range, within historical trend. And it is great.
But don't we have bigger goals to challenge us to get to where we want to get, hence some of the governments want to take?
There are. For instance, when it comes to revenue generation question, we at the IFS held a press conference before the budget. We had what we call pre-budget forum. And we challenged the government to tap into untapped revenue sources. Untapped in the sense that, there have been so many giveaways over there. And we argued that the government has to try to start reversing some of these giveaways. One, the mining sector. There are so many giveaways. People, aim at enticing the mining companies to come into the country in the 80s and in the 90s. We feel those enticements are not so necessary. So the government has to, have a stronger hand and trying to, get more revenue from the mining sector. We have the free trade zone in order to entice companies to come in to produce exportable commodities. So many tax incentives, so many incentives were accorded foreign companies to come in. And for instance,
but they are in, but are they doing what they're supposed to do? We have so many of them in the free zones.
We have so many of them in. And that is why we're arguing that perhaps those tax incentives are not necessary now. For instance, the free zone access, for the first 10 years, those companies will pay no corporate tax. After the 10 years, corporate tax cannot exceed 8%. Meanwhile, these domestic manufacturers are paying 25% corporate tax rate. Why give all this? And on top of that, there have been studies over studies that have found that, in fact, it is not these tax incentives that foreign investors look at. It's the general macro environment. So just try to improve upon your general macro legal environment. If you do that, you'll be able to attract them anyway. You don't need to go ahead and give these tax giveaways.
Former Minister of Finance, Mr. Tepe, believes that the country's potential is being overestimated and has cautioned the government against that. Could this be the case?
To some extent, yes. To me, I want the government to take a gradualist approach. You know, like I just talked about revenue, thinking that within 1 year we can rake in so much. It's not helpful. Come in, gradually assess your strength and move from there. You know, it is good that they are trying to challenge themselves, but they still have to be to take gradualist approach to what they do.
But again, what do you make of governments, you know, they are creating more jobs, you know, the creation of more jobs agenda, and do you trust that this government can actually create sustainable jobs?
You see, the budget says they are going to create about 100,000 jobs
right,
for graduates. We do not have the details yet, but it sounds like a government that is expecting a whole lot of investment for 100,000 jobs within 1 year. It's not small at all. If you are not expending huge investment from the public sector and from the private sector, you wouldn't be saying that. So if it is said, it's differently, so back to Bob and ICBB, so maybe they know what they are talking about. We haven't had the detail yet, but it looks like somebody or a government that is expecting in a huge injection of funds. But
from where?
From where? First of all, from the public side, from the public sector, we do not see that funds. Because you are still in the process of consolidating. I just said before, that it is not a groove budget yet. You're still cutting expenditure here and there. And there's no money to inject huge sums of money. So is it coming from the private sector? If it's coming from the private sector, what kind of amenities that are in place?
But Saeed, should the government be vivid on telling us where exactly the monies are coming from?
Exactly.
So why are they silent on it then?
We are hoping that they will release, documents, on these issues. For instance, the planting for food and other initiatives, you don't know much about it. I'm told that there is a document that has been developed, but it is not public yet. So these jobs that are to be created, you want to know the details so that you can analyze and assess and see the doability of these things.
But I'm thinking now, so what if I won't tell you where I'm getting the funds from, but I am getting the funds anyway, and we will see development? I mean, doesn't it cut the story? Isn't it end of story? I mean, there is development already and things are happening. Do we necessarily have to know where the funds are coming from?
You are a private individual. You can locate this business wherever you choose, but government is different. You see, and the government is not also acting alone. The government is acting the whole country. So the government also needs support from the populace and everybody, political parties, everybody, all the institutions. So what you want to do as a government, you want to make it public so that here and there you get the support that you need. If you hide it, what benefit are you gaining from doing that? I
see, but a Juma budget and making Ghana work again, I mean, was Ghana not working before? Should they have given such taglines, making Ghana work again? What do you think?
Some of these, political talks, and we are economists, and, Ghana working or not working again. Of course, there were certain issues like macroeconomic instability. They are trying to stabilize it. That doesn't mean the country was not working at all. So these are the words that politicians use. Let them continue to use their words.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. You are still watching The Hard Truth, and I still have with me Dr. Boakye, Saeed Boakye, who is a research fellow at the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and a very late comer who just joined us, Honorable Ntim Fordjour. Reverend Honorable Ntim Fordjour is the Member of Parliament for Assin South Constituency. Welcome to The Hard Truth.
Thank you.
Why were you so late?
My apologies for not being able to come on time. We began the debate on the budget today, and there were some very important points that we needed to be present to put across.
I see.
So my apologies.
But well, you're here now, and then thank you so much for coming once again to the hard truth. Now, Ntim, the theme for this year's budget is putting Ghana back to work, and there are a whole lot of policies, programs in the budget that seeks to achieve this. However, beyond the nice policies and programs and targets, the ultimate determinant should be how it's going to be implemented to affect the lives of Ghanaians. So what do you think? Do you think that is the case? Is the budget scanning towards improving the lives of Ghanaians?
Thank you once again for the opportunity to be here. And my greetings to Dr. Said Boakye, my co-panelist, and our esteemed viewers. And quickly, condolences to the families of my brother, Kaba, Mr. Kojo Asariba for Champon, for the sad passing, and his soul rests in perfect peace. The budget 2018 that was read came on the heels of very significant macroeconomic stability that the 2017 budget and economic policy statement had produced. And it is important that we put it in perspective, and the theme is very appropriate because we are poised to ensure that Ghana gets back to work. You recall that end December 2016, growth rate stood at 3.6%, which has been the lowest growth rate in 23 years. Inflation stood around.
It's good at how the think tank say, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I'm glad Dr. Said Boakye is here. We had inflation hovering over 15%, and we saw debt sustainability issues, which had been very crucial. And fundamentally, to have an economy growing and developing at the same time, the foundation that gives that catalyst, that even fundamentally underpins growth, that triggers growth and development, is macroeconomic stability, particularly when you have your macro fiscal framework well suited, well grounded, and strategized. Then you are ready to grow, and you are ready to develop. The macroeconomic stability, I still maintain the argument that it is very important. Some school of thoughts may argue, play the devil's advocate, that you may give all these nice figures that are very impressive, but doesn't reflect in the pockets of the ordinary Ghanaian.
Exactly.
And I will argue to the point. That is the point where I would land. For instance, if you are having an economy growing at 3.6%, that is abysmal. And having grown it from 3.6% to even 7.9 mid-year, and then that is observed growth, and then estimated to end at 6.3%, at end year 2017. That is a very impressive transformational turnaround. One other significant macroeconomic indicator, and if I'm to even explain further,
some people feel left out of the budget. I mean, the budget is to see fiscal evidence, improving the lives of Ghanaians. Speaking on Joy FM, on Super Morning Show, I think last week, Friday, one Antibia market, Queen at Makola said she had little faith in the budget because they felt left out. The budget didn't really target people in the informal sector. Don't you think that's the case?
I hold a different opinion.
I'm listening.
For instance, as I was enumerating, when macroeconomic indicators, and I'm spending more time there because, for instance, if you went to the hospital for treatment, the first thing you'll be checked your temperature. The doctor might likely check your pressure, and then your weight and other information data will be taken. And that forms the basis, even before the lab test is run, for other, whether malaria, whether typhoid, whether any virus, whether parasite, to be determined. The lab results, when it comes and the doctor looks at it, for the doctor to declare you healthy depends on how healthy those figures turn out. And that is exactly what the indicators we use to measure the health of the economy. For instance, for the people in the informal sector, in the past regime where policy rate hovered around 25.5%, we had the lending rates even in some cases 40%, 38%, which means people had to borrow at the rate of 32%, 35%. In those regimes, the question to ask yourself is, the person who is selling cocoa, who has gone to take a little loan to buy corn and to buy sugar to sell at a cost of 32%, how much margin is the person going to make to be able to pay back?
Ntima,
now,
are
haven't dropped that. Haven't dropped that. Are you
saying that Siam Purdue, a spare party dealer Bosokan, is also wrong when he says that if you look at the whole budget, you cannot really put one or two together, to actually have a representation of the 2018 budget? I mean, the government promised to take some tax incentives away by introducing what they called paperless, clearance or paperless process. That in itself, for instance, gives so much taxes, some hidden taxes they are all complaining about.
No, that is not the case. But just before I respond to that specifically, now we are in regimes where policy rate has dropped to 21%. And though marginally lending rate has also responded, now we are even having on the market lending rates around 28%, some 25%. So that is an improvement. Now the abolishment of 17.5% tax on financial transactions hitherto would have been cost to you, would have been cost to me. But now that is savings for us. The abolishment of 17.5% tax on the domestic air tickets has been savings for you, has been saving for anyone who would be using domestic air flights. And these are the real gains that the budget represented. Now, again, there's been detailed analysis to the effect that the tax, there were two broad strategies that underpinned the just ended budget. And Dr. Said Boakye would agree that in economic analysis, it is always proper to do it in historical perspective, to see where we're coming from and the current baseline, and to even be able to make informed projections for the future. So it's relevant that I put across the fact that we had two broad strategies. One was moving away from taxation to production, and that has worked. And we sacrificed 1 billion. We had to give away 1 billion by tax cuts. And it is phenomenal that even in the midst of that tax cut, sacrificing 1 billion cedis, we've still had been able to record growth rate of 7.9. That is phenomenal. That said, we also implemented the strategy of fiscal discipline, which miraculously and thanks to the economic brilliance of the finance minister, of the economic management team, we've seen a deficit, a GDP a deficit of 9.4% of the GDP drop to 6.3%, and that is phenomenal here again. So and even though tax revenue was marginally missed, the target was marginally missed, albeit within the space that we had and the revenue that was available, we managed it in a way so prudently to have recorded a decline even in deficits. That is how economies must run.
Your take on it. Do you think that informal sector, you made your point, let me come to you. Do you think the informal sector, has been left out from it?
Not necessarily so. At the end of the day, if you're budgeting and you come to meet a situation where the macroeconomic environment is unstable, the first thing you do is to stabilize it. But to stabilize it, you have to cut down government spending. What serves as a stimulus from the government sector is government spending. So if the government is not spending, it will help to stabilize the economy, all right. But it will not be impacting on the life of the people positively. That is why the market woman or the average Ghanaian is complaining, because the government is restricting spending. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. That's what needs to be done to stabilize the economy. But by doing that, the side effect is like taking medicine to try to heal, say fever. But then it is causing another thing. So government's trying to stabilize the economy by restricting spending so that inflation is tamed, the exchange rate depreciation is tamed. The net effect is that the government is not inducing production. And for that matter, the average, Ghanaian is suffering. let's try to put some numbers, meat on some of what I'm saying. The government is able to affect the lives of the people through what we call government investment expenditure, particularly. But government investment expenditure has gone down so much. For instance, in 2016, government investment expenditure was 7.7 billion, which was about 4.6% of GDP. Currently, in 2017, it has gone down to, I think, 4.6 billion, about 3-something billion down. And in terms of GDP, it is only 2.3%. So the government is not spending. Roads are not being constructed as before. Because of that.
Why are they just being careful? Why is that? Is the government being
first of all,
overly careful?
There are two things over here. They are being careful, and they have to be. Because if you keep on spending, there could be a problem. You'll be compounding the problem. But if you remember, I was saying we at IFS prepared a paper on revenue earmarking and fiscal rigidities. And we argued that there's no space to restrict spending other than restrict government investment spending, which is very crucial because government wages and salaries, interest payment and amortization, which we call debt service expenditure, and earmark funds. When you add these three, they have eaten the whole fiscal space. So government cap the amount you allocate to the various statutory funds. When you do that, you bring the remaining amount into the center to smoothen the system so that that amount of money can be used to spend on investment expenditure so that it will help. While you are consolidating, you will still be able to spend a little bit.
So what will make... Okay.
Hold on. The government responded to that positively, capped the earmark fund to about 25%, got that additional money. But instead of spending it on investment, the government has brought on board additional expenditure. In Zongo Development Fund, Northern Development Fund, Middle Belt, Saudi Development Fund, One District, 143, all these things are being brought on board, even though you're in the process of trying to consolidate and you are bringing additional spending. So when they capped the earmark funds and the money was available, instead of spending it on this traditional government investment, they couldn't. And they are spending it on new things. Because
so that was unnecessary. Do you think that's necessary?
To me,
it's not.
They should have taken their time. They should have taken their time to analyze, come to the system, for first year, second year, and others. We advised against starting free SHS this year. We were not arguing that it's not a good thing. It's a good thing, but be able to get better grounding before you start bringing all this new expenditure on board. So if the market woman is complaining, it's coming from two sources. One, the government has to restrict spending, but two, the restriction of spending is, the capping of revenue is going somewhere else. It's not going to where the market woman will benefit. And that's
I see, but I think you want to make a point, but a quick one then.
Yeah, the first point that I would want to make is that in economic policy, there is a principle that you spend within what you get. That's a fundamental economic principle.
So the government is spending within
what
you get?
If you are spending beyond what you're getting, you're going to run into debt sustainability challenges. That was characterizing the previous regime. You remember how come our debt to GDP ratio was hovering around 36% as of end of 2008, but by the year 2016, it was 73% of GDP. That was a very crucial skyrocketing indicator that was not healthy for the economy. Now, by prudent economic management and reprofiling, we've been able to curb that to 68% of the GDP. Now, if we are talking about government spending, it is important that deficits are reduced. A deficit that is in close to 10% is certainly a very unhealthy indicator. And by so doing, by restricting spending, and even in the midst of the regime where spending was restricted, still be able to stimulate growth increasing it from 3.6%, doubling it even to 6.3%. That is a very prudent way of managing the economy. And these features are some of the premises upon which one would say that NPP is a better manager of the economy than the NDC.
I see, but again, I wouldn't want to
Dr.
toe that line.
Said mentioned one very crucial point, that he would have expected that much more of the capping would have been earmarked for government investment.
You don't agree with him?
Investment. But the question that I want to interrogate is, what could be better investment than investment into education, into free SHS? What could be better investment than investment into industrialization? We all agree that our children are the future. We all agree that the demographics of our economy has that a lot of people are poor. A lot of people are challenged even in affording the education of the awards. And the sustainable development goals, education literacy is one very crucial factor that is measured.
So you're happy it started at the time the government said it was going to start.
Again,
we don't have time for that. Moving on.
No, but it's important. These are very important investments that must be espoused.
PricewaterhouseCoopers has indicated that government, may struggle to get that 51 billion revenue amount unless it's, intensify tax compliance measures for next year. Considering the fact that the shortfalls in revenue, this year was, short due to the delays in the implementation of the tax compliance measures, shouldn't, this be some aren't we were expecting it?
If you have followed the gains that I've made, accruing from the implementation of the paperless system at the port, you would appreciate that if we are to sustain through and even improve it further, there are a few challenges with it as we speak. If we are to improve on that system and to ensure that that Ghana Revenue Authority is resourced in a manner that will be able to, widen the tax net, and the tax efficiency strategies that we have put in place are judiciously followed through and implemented, we will be able to achieve those targets.
Your take on it, sir?
On the
tax compliance.
You see, when it comes to their revenue projection, I started by saying this year they've learned some lesson that they are going to increase overall revenue, total revenue in grant by 23.7%. I call it is within range, because if you just take from 2012 to 2017, average growth rate of revenue is 21.7%. So trying to grow it at 23.7% is just 2 percentage points above the average, and it can be done. And I'm encouraged by their revenue performance in the third quarter of 2017. In fact, within the third quarter alone, they brought in about 14 billion Ghana cedis in revenue. We were so much concerned for the first half performance, which was 17 billion for the whole first and second quarter. But the third quarter alone, the government was able to bring in 14 billion. Because of that, we are encouraged that perhaps when it comes to revenue, things have begun to work. So when the numbers came in and I computed the average and look at the trend, as a 23.7% can be obtained. So I'm not so much concerned about revenue as I was when the 2017 budget was brought. I'm not concerned about expenditure misc, MIX, expenditure mix. I'm more concerned about that because it looks like they are taking their eye so much off government capital expenditure because of so many initiatives. I'm not arguing that these initiatives are bad. Who reject industrialized economy? Nobody would. But if you don't take your time and try to do so many things at the same time, you will not be able to achieve anything. None of them could succeed. And mind you, President Kufuor, when he came in, started something similar. District industrialization program. Every district was supposed to get one district, a factory. After his term, how many factories have been established? Because of funding issue. You see, it's a good thing if you want to do, but you have the funding for it. That's why we are only cautioning the government. take your time, move slowly. Don't bring all these things on board at the same time. That's all what you are saying. No, but let's try also to, before you go to the next question, government is touting the achievement in regards to growth. You have to be careful over there. Growth, it is true, has picked up, but it is coming from the oil sector. And this measure in regards to the oil sector had already been put in place. I don't want to say, the credit is due to that, the credit is due to that party. But the fact is that, the country was able to begin the new phase of oil production in 2017, and the country has begun. So the growth you are seeing is being induced by the oil sector. If you look at the non-oil sector, it is performing worse than last year. And it is also coming from the same argument I'm making. Investment spending is so limited. And if it is only even affecting short-term growth, like you are seeing this year, then no problem. But in the long term, if you don't invest in your infrastructure, you diminish the competitiveness of the economy. So the government has to, have a second look at the expenditure mix, and take its time, so that the competitiveness of the economy in the long term is not compromised.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Hard Truth, and I still have in the studio Dr. Said Boakye, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and Reverend Honorable John Ntim Fordjour is the Member of Parliament for Assin South Constituency. You wanted to give a rebuttal on what?
Yeah,
in
I just
15
wanted
seconds?
to put some facts across with regards to our growth history the past 3 years. 2015, the industry grew at negative 0.3%. In 2016, it grew at negative 0.5%. And so if there are strategies, but this year it grew at 17.7%. And the argument is certain arrangement had been put in place, and that is what I want to.
He's shaking his head. Is that right?
So
is that right?
The growth is coming from the oil sector.
Yes, and you see, the industry is made up of manufacturing, and it's also made up
manufacturing,
with
mining,
oil.
quarrying, construction.
Our reliance. Sometimes when it comes to the contribution of oil to the industrial sector of growth, we exaggerate it. You see, and that's the temptation that we have to avoid. So when industry is mentioned, it almost sounds synonymous to oil, but that is not the case. Manufacturing sector as a subsector in the industrial sector has grown significantly this year. But we had oil, and at the same time, the manufacturing sector put together for the past 3 years, they have been growing at negative rates. That was very unhealthy. So that has to be put in context. Services rates, we've had agriculture for the past 4 years growing at 0.something rate, very stagnant. But thankfully, with the coming to being of planting for food and jobs, we are seeing some of these gains. These are the policies that must be sustained through. We cannot defer some of these very salient policies to tomorrow.
You're very interested.
But to land on the taxation,
let's talk about unemployment in Ntim because of our time. We have to talk about unemployment. Unemployment in Ntim continues to be a major challenge in the country, despite numerous promises and policies to create jobs for the youth. I think in the 2018 budget, again, several policies and programs have been outlined to create new jobs for the youth in various sectors. How well can government deliver on its job creation crusade, and how sustainable, the word is sustainable, will these jobs be?
Jobs as a factor still remain very important in our governance system. It is the expectation of many, after having completed various skills training, after having completed certain level of education, and even those who may not have had the opportunity to further the education are still entitled to jobs. But I would want to even just zoom out, just to create the real picture of our unemployment situation. We have millions of backlog of unemployed people who are already in the system. And in the coming years, if some of these policies, for instance, Nation Builders Call, is not implemented, it is going to further aggravate the situation. Now we are having an averagely 100,000 students that are being produced from the tertiary. And every year we are going to have averagely 100,000 people who are going to be produced and ready for employment.
Right.
The question we ask ourselves, what is the capacity of our public sector? What is the capacity of our even private sector to absorb these numbers whilst dealing with the backlog? Now, averagely, about 400,000 students are going to graduate from second cycle institutions every year. And what is the absorption capacity of tertiaries, polytechnics, nursing training, agricultural institutions, technical universities, traditional universities, private universities? Put together, they cannot even take 40% of these numbers. So around about 60% will have to truncate their education. They will have to be provided some unskilled and semi-skilled jobs. Now, even to talk of the 100,000 that will be skilled per the training that they may have obtained, still adding to the numbers, this is huge. It is something that urgently this policy
you are going to give us the jobs. Sustainability is key here. How sustainable in team? Yes. How sustainable are the jobs be? That's what I want to know. We know that Ghana is aware there are huge lots and lots of numbers unemployed graduates out there. So this is where you guys come in. Sustainability. How are we going to sustain the jobs?
Even before I continue talking about Nation Builder Score, which seeks to produce 100,000 jobs for graduates, let's look at the tax policy. And one very important component is the tax holiday for young entrepreneurs. So this is, I am just painting a picture that there is no public sector job that could be created to the tune that can absorb significant numbers of the backlog we have and even to address going forward. So we need to have other alternative policies that will seek to encourage and stimulate entrepreneurship. Because by so doing, one person will be able to set up a firm and be able to employ 2 or 3. Another will be able to set up, employ 3 or 10. And with the support given and with that conditions that are enabling provided, for instance, the National Entrepreneurial Innovation Plan, you interviewed the CEO sometime on your flagship platform, and he enumerated the packages that they have. Very fantastic. The access to credits and facilities that are available, the support services that are given, and with the coming into being of this tax holiday for young entrepreneurs, it is going to be a fantastic boost.
But again, government usually gives projections on the number of jobs it expects to create, but it's usually difficult to actually trace whether these are, jobs or the jobs have been created already. How do we ensure that the figures government says they will do, so 100,000, how do we ensure that government is not just throwing these figures about?
I think you're concerned about that because we've seen over the years when certain from the same quarters, the estimated jobs that had been produced, there had been some very serious discrepancies. You hear one quarter saying there's 300,000 jobs, another coming and saying 75,000 jobs within the same period. And I think basically that has been the case. But the Nation Builder Score is a very formidable policy, well thought through and planned, that monitoring and evaluation at every stage is going to be done. And it is going to be very easy to track and monitor real jobs that are being created, both direct and indirect jobs that will be created.
How?
And
how do we track? How do we monitor?
There are tools in place to measure. For instance, if one factory is set up, you know how many direct jobs would be created. That could easily, when you take the labor force of the company, you know how many jobs have been created. You can also measure same for the indirect jobs.
The government in the 2017 budget projected about 750,000 jobs, to be created under the Planting for Food and Jobs program. And then the budget, however, provided no details on the number of jobs that have been 750,000. Yes, no details on the number that the jobs would have been created so far under the program. This raises credibility questions, doesn't it?
What I recall for specifically Planting for Food and Jobs, 285,000 farmers registered, and that was marginally That was even over the target that we set. Yeah, so that you are able to quickly measure. In terms of the indirect jobs, let me give you one typical example. I worked briefly in Takwa, a typical mining community, and there was a time when one of the mines had to lay off 300 staff. 300. At the laying off of that 300 staff, it was as if economic activities in the town had come to a halt. There were other communities that the whole mine had to close down. At the closure of that mine, which employed, let's even mention specifically Obuasi. Obuasi laid off their staff, and now go to Obuasi. Obuasi is never the same again. That goes to point to the fact that indirect jobs are very important. And a very important ancillary provision that direct jobs provide. Now, 100,000 jobs, direct jobs that this program seeks to produce is just the category of skilled jobs for graduates. But I'm also giving you other alternative arrangements. For instance, entrepreneurial arrangement put in place to absorb entrepreneurs. The other arrangement is one district, one factory that is going to also employ people. The stimulus package that is principally anchored on revamping existing but distressed factories and ensuring that they double their production, double their employment. And now we're even getting into planting for food and investment.
Let's look at this. The government has allocated, we said, I think 600 million to employ 100,000 graduates as part of their national or nation building corps program. Now let's go what Imani said. Imani Center for Policy and Education has described the NACOP program as a reflection of a policy incoherence and myopic. What would you say? Are they right?
You see, that's what I was saying. We need documentation. It is easier said than done. I'm going to create 100,000 jobs. Where are the jobs going to come from? This program is going to employ how many? That program is going to employ how many? 100,000 jobs are a lot. But if you look at the amounts they have located towards these initiatives, they are not enough. About 4.7 billion for all these initiatives, including 100,000 jobs within 1 year. In fact, look at the one district, one factory. Where have you gotten to? In 2018, you may get to certain phase. It will not take off so much. Why don't you take your time and be a little bit realistic and be a little bit complain with the people that you are doing this, but it's going to be gradual. If you raise the bar so much, at the end of the day, people are going to measure you based on the bar you raised. And there could be problem. I'm not saying what the government is doing is wrong. Many of these are right.
But they should take their time.
But when it is mixed with certain, slogans and others, then they appear something different. If they were to
like what? Like which
If
slogans?
there were to be an MDC person over here, they will be give and take. You see, that's what I'm calling that the government should try to refrain from, because the tax at hand is very huge. They didn't come to meet very good economy. Currently, they are consolidating. At the same time, they are calling for 100,000 jobs. Look at how investment is suffering. Yeah. And you are calling for 100,000 jobs. Where are the jobs coming from? 4.7 billion allocated to these programs that they are not even ready to begin. The factories are not there. We are now currently at the planning stage, and you are raising the bar. Be careful. That's my concern. All these initiatives are so good, but be careful. And, even if you have so many initiatives, you can tell the people, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. But 2018, you can do only so much. Then the following year, you're going to add that.
But they're doing so much now.
But you are putting everything together at the same time, and the money is not just there.
So, Saeed, Ghanaians are watching right now. What would you say? What should we expect in the 2018 budget?
They should stick to their plan when it comes to the fiscals. And if they do that, they'll be able to strengthen the consolidation. They shouldn't let the people know that this is a growth budget. This is not a growth budget. It's the budget that is continuing the consolidation process. You see. And the government is rightly calling for private sector support. But the private sector, too, wants to see what has been done. You want to establish a factory. You want the private sector to come in there. They want certain amenities to be there. You have enough funding to establish amenities in all these factories to attract the private sector.
You should take their time.
You should take your time.
Right.
This is a consolidation budget. You can throw in growth here and there, but it's not a growth budget. You haven't been able to completely stabilize the economy. Inflation is still 11 point something. It used to be single digit for a long time. It is still 11.7. Look at where interest rate is, around 29%, the lending rate. So take your time.
What is the general outlook from where you sit? What's the general outlook for 2018?
Yeah, but just if I even respond to that, it is important that the point as taking policies in a systematic method is important. Remember, there was a position that we've been trying to espouse, even at the implementation of free SHS, and how first stream has been taken off to have rolled out systematically, and then the subsequent year, another cohort will add up, and then until we're able to have all the three streams come on board. We came at very heavy criticisms, even by people whose policy position on free SHS was completely not in tangent with what
no one is saying they are not laudable
in all consistency.
Why can't you do them in batches? You do them one at a time.
Yeah, in all consistency, we have freeing up resources and freeing up energies in the private sector, ensuring that the industrialization policy is private sector driven, and what government has to do is to put in the necessary infrastructure and amenities. The IPEP is a program that is targeted at that. The $1 million one constituency every year is targeted at ensuring that access roads even leading to locations earmarked for factories are done, electricity extension, and these are so this is an integrated approach to ensuring that these policies are done. Technically speaking, what alternatives were provided? Providing 100,000 jobs is very critical, and with the jobs that we even need is more than 100,000, and that is just one specific category. That is just skilled jobs. And there are, I've mentioned to you, avenues that are contained and going to be driven by the budget to even create unskilled jobs and semi-skilled jobs. So we must acknowledge that. You see, government policies must be targeted at the needs of the people. The needs of the people must not be isolated from resource application. You see, we remember there were regimes where every year our desk stock. Let's just land on this point. Every year our desk stock grew at a rate of 36%. Every year we were borrowing. We were going to the international capital market and borrowing. And the excuse was we were going to use these funds to construct roads, to do infrastructure, and at the end of the period, there's so much arrears that is also accruing. So the interrogations: what were those funds applied for? What were those funds used for?
Quick one.
But again, we are going to ensure that we are going to, going for 2018 budget is going to consolidate on the stability and the gains that we have been able to, like the senior minister would say, Honorable Osafo, if a patient is bleeding, you must first stop the bleeding.
Quickly.
You see, my quick is that,
the rest going forward.
You know, as an independent person, we all want it to work. And to us, it doesn't matter whether it is MPP or NDC. It working is what is important to us. If you look at President Kufuor's district industrialization program, at the end of the day, funding wasn't enough. Even the Ayensu starch factory that was established is struggling to get raw materials. I was concerned when I look at the document about planting for food and jobs. I said, first of all, food supply is not so much of a problem in the country, especially during harvesting season. When it comes to food supply, the problem is off harvesting season. So what you need is storage when it comes to food. Or when the rains don't come, food supply becomes affected. So what you need is irrigation. If you're going to continue to plant for food like our traditional farmers do, during harvesting season is going to be a glut. Prices are going to come down. So to me, that policy is not targeted well. But let's look at the district industrialization program, the one district, one factory. It needs raw materials to sustain it. The government could have called the program Planting for Raw Materials. Growing raw materials.
The name alone is a problem.
Growing raw materials to feed the industries that are about to come. We are not seeing that. You are planting for food. Is food a problem in the country, particularly during harvesting season? That is why I'm saying you take your time to plan these policies for long-term good of the country.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming.
It's important that the planting for food and jobs
spent
has been misinterpreted. You see, the expected interpretation that Doc wanted is exactly what the program is meant at and is doing. It's planting for food and jobs.
I see. We'll talk about it the next time. I've been talking to Dr. Said Boakye, Senior Research Fellow at Institute for Fiscal Studies. Thank you so much, Doc, for coming. Honorable Reverend Ntim Fordjour is the Member of Parliament for Assin South Constituency. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for coming. I hope you come next time, very early next time. And on my personal behalf and behalf of the Hard Truth team, would like to extend our deepest condolence to the multimedia family and to the nuclear family of our brother Kaba. And we say, may your gentle soul rest in peace. You could join the discussion on the 2018 budget. What do you think? Do you think it's an Ejumapa budget or it's a 419 budget? Social media platforms are on your screens right now. My name is Nana Akosia Kunedu Asante Samuelson. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good night. Bye.